Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry if my connection is a little slow. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. My name is Dana Avedon-Cohn. I am the editorial director for Macy's. I have a long background in storytelling. I started out as a magazine editor. I've worked for publications such as InStyle, Self, and digital publications like Pop Sugar before joining the retail space with Macy's. So I'm excited to talk to you about storytelling as a marketing tool. So I first wanted to start with why your brand story matters. So a brand story is really the heart and soul of your brand. It helps to set you apart from your competition in a crowded marketplace, and really shows your brand's value. So the best brand stories help to create an emotional connection with your customers, and we're going to talk a lot about how to do that in the next few slides. So in this presentation, we'll cover building your brand story, finding your why, and guidelines, best practices, and of course, authentic storytelling. So how do you build a brand story? Whether you're building a new brand or looking to define your marketing message for an established brand that you may have already gotten off the ground, you really want to focus on a few key factors. First is establishing your core mission and values, finding your why, your purpose, and knowing your quick pitch. You also really want to tap into your audience and understand who they are, and this will help build brand awareness. So how do you find your why? This is an exercise that I think everyone can do no matter what stage of the business you're in, whether you're a new company thinking about starting one or an established brand or buyer or seller. I think first you want to start with, why did you start this business? What is driving you every day? What is the purpose of your work? And finding your why for doing what you do. Does your company solve a problem? Does it improve the lives of others? And then taking time to just consider what the journey has been like in building your brand, what inspires you, and really what your dreams are for the future of your company. Guidelines and best practices. So sometimes it can be hard to get started, but I really want to talk about why having a core mission and your values is so important. So they're really the beliefs that you and your company stand for. You want to make them unique and memorable, and you want to create them with your team, whether you're working with just a small handful of people or you have a large group. I think it's important to work on this as a group because it helps to reflect the values that your group shares. And this is going to make you more effective as a business if everybody feels aligned to the goal and the values of the brand. And I think this helps to guide decisions for collaborations and partnerships. If you know where you stand, what's important, it makes it really easy to align with other companies that feel the same. And then, of course, consistency and authenticity. Once you've defined your core mission and values, it becomes really easy to create consistency and authenticity in your storytelling. And building something that's compelling and focused, tied to your core mission, is going to guide the narrative for your brand. So I want to talk a little bit about a case study, but before I get into this, I want you to think about how well makers and sellers are uniquely positioned to storytell around the products that they create. Everything that you do is deeply rooted in your community, your culture, your passion, and your craft. And it's really just tapping into those stories that are already there right in front of you, and then leveraging that to tell stories around the products that are most important. So a few guidelines and best practices when you're doing this. Telling authentic stories will inevitably attract consumers with similar values. And why is this important? Because you're tapping into an audience that's already engaged and one that you can easily build relationships with to be excited about your brand, active consumers, and of course, help share and spread your message. So you want to position your brand in relevant searches by looking at trending hashtags on social media, if you were able to watch our presentation from this morning, we're focusing on one of the HFI solutions for Handmade with Love. We loved this hashtag because it really felt centered around the approach that, handmade is a special sector, that these products take time to produce, they're intentional. And so we wanted to find a space that connected all of you together. And we love this space for trending hashtags because we feel like this is a great way to get your message out there at low cost. So you're also encouraging your shoppers to create content for you. This can be done by attaching your social media to any of your products on the label and making sure that your social media presence is up to date. This helps to promote engagement and, of course, let people interact with your brand. So I wanted to just talk about a case study. You may have caught her quick fire session, but this is Ariella Suster. She's the founder of Sequence Collection. And I wanted to share her mission statement. So her brand is focused on disrupting the cycle of violence that limits at-risk youth based in El Salvador. And she took that mission statement and allowed it to inform a lot of the product decisions that they've made as a brand. So she worked in partnership with her team to create different product stories that spoke to her overall mission statement and values. So they developed the Let's Love keychain, which you can find on Powered by People, the Self-Love bracelet, and of course, the Resilience bracelet, which is in partnership with Vital Voices. And she weaves storytelling in a very authentic way into these products. They're connected to her mission, connected with her values, and they also were in partnership with the other people on her team, which makes them feel even more a part of the message. I love this quote. So an emotional connection is the degree to which the consumer cares about a brand beyond its rational benefits. And essentially what that means is you want people to feel something when they engage with your brand. It's not just about the product, although that's important. Of course, we want to ensure quality and all the other things that are valued when you purchase something, but you want them to feel a connection because there are so many choices of where you can buy things from. There's so many choices out there. So how do you stand out and how do you build an emotional connection that gets people to come back and be loyal to your brand? And next, I want to talk about really authentic storytelling. I think authentic storytelling can be broken into two different buckets. So some storytelling will connect to the backstory of your brand, and some will connect to the product. So going over a few ways to connect to your brand backstory, we touched on this a little bit, but creating an emotional connection. So that might be sharing what it does for your community. It might be pulling back the curtain and really introducing people and your audience to the makers behind the brand, sharing personal stories of positive change through the lens of your brand, or it could connect specifically to a product. This motivates customers to take action and share your brand story with others. You can share your process for design, your detail of craftsmanship and quality, and of course, all of the environmental and sustainable benefits that come from shopping from this sector. Community. So we've talked a lot about community in some of our other conversations today, but community is everything. And that's your community on the ground with you wherever you may be. And of course, it's your larger virtual and global community of people that care about this sector. So plugging into larger networks of makers and sharing opportunities for collaboration and making sure to position your brand in spaces with like-minded consumers who share the same set of core values that you do. So just to wrap up, before we move into some Q&As, I wanted to just kind of go over the most important points that we touched on today. Sitting down to establish what your mission and values are essential because it's going to drive the decisions that you make, not only as a business, but how you spread your message and share the message of what you're doing out in the world. establishing your purpose and your unique value is essential. And it's something, again, that speaks uniquely to this audience. You all have a story that's important to tell. Your story matters, and it creates an authentic connection to your brand. And lastly, leveraging your community. We're here to share resources, opportunities, and to sort of plug into larger organizations that can help make us all a success. So I would love to open it up to you to see if there's any questions or thoughts. And maybe if you have already gone through this exercise, or you have a brand mission or purpose that you've been working on, maybe you can drop it in the chat or share with the group.
I am opening up and manning the questions. So please, you've got a editorial and content veteran here. Share your questions. I'm going to start out with one for you, Dana. A lot of artisan brands really are looking to maximize PR, right? They don't have large marketing budgets to be able to run advertising campaigns. Do you have any strategies when submitting, whether it's press releases or product samples to magazines or to companies you're hoping to work with? Any tips on how to kind of be seen or get editors' attention?
Yeah, I think, look, I've been an editor a long time. I've received thousands of pitches, and I think it's like anything else. You have a very short time to tell your story. So you really want to understand, we call in marketing your elevator pitch, but it's essentially how can you convey your brand story quickly and effectively? And that's why it's so important to do these sorts of exercises, because you want to be able to just get your message out very fast. Here's what we do. Here's why we do it. Here's what's important. And then spend the time to craft really beautiful imagery of your product. I think just having a few, you don't have to photograph everything or spend tons of money or time or resources photographing product, but getting a few behind the scenes photos of your workshops, how your craft is unique and handmade and special, and then of course featuring the product in a really beautiful way combined with the message of your brand is going to be the most effective way. Because I think that you grab people's attention in two ways. It's visually and emotionally. So those would be the two most important, I think, to lead with.
We've got a question from Jane, and this is Jane, if you want to also elaborate on this, because this is a pretty big one. There are a lot of artisan brands. There is a lot of mass market competition. How do we stand out in a crowded marketplace? You know, what are some tips for really making that brand story stand out in the crowd?
Sure. I mean, I think there's definitely strength in numbers. We talked about this in earlier sessions today, but it's great to do your own outreach and, you know, to build up your own content, contacts and network. But really what you want to do is position yourself in to spaces where makers are coming together for a single cause. And I think that more and more big brands are starting to look at resources like this summit. These kinds of movements are growing. And so the more you can insert your brand into spaces where there's lots of eyes, it's going to be easier to get visibility. I think also understanding who is currently supporting in this space and where you can plug into existing infrastructure. So if you notice at certain retail spaces or websites, like they have a sustainable section or handmade section, that's a really good place to start, because you know that they're supporting this product, but they're also doing well with it. So they might be looking for additional resources and brands to bring on.
Awesome. There's a question from Maureen. How does a brand who buys wholesale and not directly connected to the makers, but can get the behind the scenes images, really ensure that we can make that emotional connection between maker and consumer. So for someone who is really running an independent boutique or store selling artisan product, but isn't the artisan business themselves, how do
Yeah.
they portray?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. I think, anytime your product is living in a space where you're not able to tell the story yourself, is challenging. So you want to make sure that you are able to include something with your product that has a very succinct message as to what your brand stands for and what you do. In the example of Sequence, she puts everything on the back of her tag. She has a QR code that takes you to a website. If you haven't gotten that far to build a website, you can just have that really quick mission statement on there and educate the buyer when you're meeting with them on what your brand really does. I think you do, of course, lose some control whenever you're showing up in a different space, but you can help the consumer to find out the information on their own if you can't rely on the retailer or the shopkeeper to share those. It can just be part of the tag and part of the experience of interacting with the product.
Awesome. So Alejandra asks, what is the best and easiest way to start with storytelling? What type of content should we start with? And I'll even add to the question, where should we be publishing that content?
Yeah. If you're using social media, I think it's one of the most powerful tools that we have because it's free and you can really do a lot of your own research to find out what's been successful within the sector. I wanted to highlight creating your core mission and values because I think that is the starting point for all storytelling. Everything should stem from this one umbrella message. So once you really have that, it becomes easier to tell the story about your brand. And I sort of touched on it a little bit, but breaking down the storytelling as backstory focused and product stories, there's a lot there. You can share how you started, your journey, create that emotional connection by opening up and being honest. People can sense authenticity and people are looking for truth and value. And there's so much value in what you do beyond just how beautiful the crafts you're creating are. There is a story to tell. People want to know who's making their products with handmade, where it's coming from, details about the community, how this trade has been passed down for generations, anything that you can share that sort of gives people more insight into why you're doing what you're doing and why it's special, I think will help to create that emotional connection. And in terms of, rolling out sort of storytelling on channels, it can start with just a message on your website. It can start with just your press materials that you're putting together for buyers. It can start with just the messages on your hang tags. And then when you get more comfortable, you can start to really put that message out on social media. So maybe you come up with a cadence of 4 different types of stories you want to tell. And you say, okay, one of these is going to be maker focused. One of these is going to be product focused. One of these is going to be purpose focused. And then you're kind of just repeating those 4 over and over again. And then it starts to feel really cohesive because you're coming out of the same sort of unified message, but then you're creating this kind of repetition in your storytelling where people can look forward to additional content. When you launch a new product or add a new person to your team, you can bring people along for that journey.
Okay, we've got another really good question that really speaks to one of the big issues in the sector, which is this idea of story appropriation, right? Someone using your story inauthentically or sharing an artisan's photo that isn't permissioned from that individual human being who is not just a producer of things, but has rights. So Jane says it's fine. It's a fine line for a brand as all of our customers want images, unique images. Now they're asking for videos, all of which comes with a huge added cost, time, and resource and has a value, but it's tricky for a small brand. We have people posting or reposting images of ours all the time. claiming to be collaborating with us when they're not. So it's really tricky when we're trying to remain 100% authentic to the brand and support customers, but there's a limit. How do we navigate this? She says, sorry for another big question.
Great question. I mean, I think it probably has a number of different answers. One being that if it's a large enough publication or person with a big following that you feel your message is really being misrepresented, it might be worth just reaching out to them and asking them if they could credit your brand, your company. I think that does happen a lot of times where things will just be quoted incorrectly or, used without your permission. So I think that's one way to go about it, is just to, reach out if you see something that really feels off brand or a misrepresentation of what you do. The other part of it, I would say, is just focus on your own channels and what you can control, because you want to focus your energy on pushing your brand story forward. And if people can know that, your website, your information is the source of truth, that's where they're going to follow your brand. It won't be through a one-off image that somebody lifted or misrepresented inauthentically. But I think absolutely, if it's a partnership with a retailer or a store and you're just not liking the way that it came to life, it's totally fine to reach out and just say, hey, would you mind adjusting this? Or we actually don't tell our brand story in this way. Can you change the verbiage? Or can you just add photo courtesy of, just that people can find their way back to our brand?
Love that. We have another hard dilemma. You're getting the hard questions here, Dana. What advice do you have for our ethical dilemma? Our products are made by women in very rural villages where the annual income is probably less than $1,000 a year. Our behind the scenes photo reveal a very impoverished life by developed nation standards. We don't want to appear to be objectifying our artisans, but their living standards can be shocking to our consumers. Yet we don't want to whitewash, we want to be authentic. So how do you walk this fine line of showing hardships amongst the artisan producers that they work with?
I think, first of all, that's a great question and a very big question. I think that if you're talking about imagery specifically, you can remove a lot of the, I should say, you can sort of like show images that don't reveal more than the craft itself. So let's say it's, something that a business focused on, weaving or at a loom, like maybe it's just at that particular workstation, maybe it's a close-up of the artisan's hands. There are lots of ways to show the product is handmade without the context of where the image is, or feeling like you're sharing too much about the artisans that they wouldn't feel comfortable with. And I think it's another thing to talk about with your teams, right? It's like, we want to tell a story. What do we want to highlight here? Maybe it's just, again, close-ups of people making things with their hands, but you're not showing their faces necessarily to protect their identity if they don't want to be part of the brand story visibly, but some people might. And I think I've seen lots of beautiful group photos of women standing outside holding products that they've made, and it just connects you to the people behind the product. I think that's what you're trying to do at the end of the day, is just show the human connection and how that energy and love and care goes into each product. And we can sort of control the narrative, right, a little bit with how we present the photos, how we take the photos, how much backstory we actually want to show in terms of some of the, the hardships that the people who are making these might be facing, because there's a lot of beauty in the work that you're doing too, and that can be highlighted in an authentic way.
That is awesome. I would add that you can always show the contributions that work and that market is bringing to a community. Show the national average that someone makes compared to your artisans. So I think to Dana's point, it's part of that brand story. While other people add questions, so please add your questions, your tips and tricks that you'd love here. I want to know, as part of a huge kind of historic national brand, Macy's, we all know Macy's. How do you decide how to tell that brand story of a longtime brand, and how do you look for stories of your, the brands that you carry with inside of Macy's and share those collaboratively?
Yeah, I think, for a large enterprise like Macy's, we have the challenge of telling many, many stories at once. There are, thousands of brands carried at that retailer. So it's hard sometimes to get into the specifics on each brand. Sometimes we use overarching trends to tell stories, but not necessarily at the brand level. And I think that's what's so special about makers, is that you really have the opportunity to just speak authentically to one single vision and brand. And you can take a lot of care when you build those stories, so that when you do meet with a larger retailer or get a larger opportunity for collaboration, that message is really clear, and the story that you want to put out there, and you have the ability to share that with buyers in a very quick and succinct way.
That is awesome. Any other questions from our audience? I guess going back to that original question about sort of PR and content, right? We can put out our messages on social media. We can make sure that it's across our tags, across our websites. When we want to do that outreach to kind of grow our presence, right? Are there any tips or tricks you have for reaching out? You've kind of given us how to be noticed, right? Get your materials right, get your messaging right, your value proposition right. Is it reaching out to editors through email? Are there databases? Is it mailing media kits? What's the best strategy today?
Yeah, so I mean, there is, of course, a lot of brands are paying for PR, which have editor lists, and they're sending those out in at a mass scale. But in my opinion, I haven't always found those to be most successful. I think you're much better off trying to get into a space where a lot of makers are going to get in front of an editor at once. So again, plugging into existing systems, it's hard to do on your own. So if there's an opportunity to participate in a summit like this, and you come across other retailers that are carrying a lot of these brands, like, that's a great place to start, because so many editors are looking through these sites to discover new brands. They're not waiting for a single outreach or a single message. And so being in these spaces is your PR. It helps to get your brand message out there. And then, of course, anytime you participate in a summit like this, reviewing who is there, doing a little bit of research on your own, and reaching out to some of the people that might be able to help you or make introductions goes a long way. A personal introduction from someone will always get you in the door faster than just outreaching on your own. But I have noticed brands increasingly using social media, especially Instagram, to direct message or to tag in a post that I might be interested in to showcase a new brand. I think, again, getting into these like existing hashtags and spaces is a great way for discovery. And just make sure that once someone clicks through to your profile, that all your information is there. It's easy to find you, get in touch with you, connect with you directly. So it's really important to add that kind of detail to your profiles if you have a social media presence or website.
Awesome. Do you suggest, I know you talked about user-generated content, right? And creating some of those hashtags. What's the best way to figure out what is the hashtag for my brand, and how do I spread it to my users? And then how do I use that user generated content? If they take a picture of themselves with my bag and they've used my hashtag so I can find it, how do you then use it in additional ways for
Yeah,
authentic?
so it could be something as simple as adding, we'd love to see how, how you're enjoying our product or living with our product, right? And then you add your handle onto the tag. I would suggest always putting your handle because that's likely to stay the same. And it'll help you, you'll get a message, a notification anytime somebody shares and uses your brand handle on any of their posts. And then you as the maker can assess if it's something that you feel is great and that you want to reshare on your own channel. And then best practice is always to just send them a quick note and say, thank you so much. You can write it on their actual post if you want. We love the content that you created. Would you be okay with us sharing? They'll usually say yes, and then you can go ahead and share it. And if it's not something that feels right and you don't want to have it on your handle, use it as an opportunity just to reach out and say thank you. I think that kind of personal connection can keep a customer coming back. I always like to think of, a great shop experience, or if you've ever gone into a store where you had a really good feeling or connection with the person that works there, like you might be more likely to go back because you're starting to build a relationship. And that's what this is. You're building a community virtually of people that are engaged, excited about what you're doing. And the more you share and the more they share, the closer and stronger that community becomes.
Awesome. So another question, when it comes to using, or we're kind of talking about joining in the Handmade with Love hashtag because it has, I don't remember what it was, 26 million posts or something like that. The question is, when you use a large hashtag like Handmade with Love that has a huge following, do you think using it as a small brand, you just get lost in it all? How do we actually make that work for us and stand apart?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the algorithm is certainly rewarding newer content. So the more you post, the more that you're likely to be seen. I do think that it's only one way to join in on a conversation, but it certainly is a way to start gaining exposure. There are many, many people who spend time, sifting through hashtags around handmade, and this one certainly had the highest engagement. And I would also say that it's a way for you to discover other opportunities and collaboration ideas. Maybe you come across a brand that is doing something really well and you want to either work with them or reach out to them or connect with them, or potentially incorporate some of the things that they're doing on their own social media feed into yours. So I would think of it, one, as an outreach tool, but also as a research tool. And then I think when we do create templates to have you upload, that's just one of the hashtags that you'll use at the bottom. I think that people are still searching and discovering based on hashtags. So we can find, a number of recommendations for ones to include in a single post and create a template that you can then share. So you're showing up in this one search, but you're also showing up in many others.
Awesome. A question that I got offline here is sometimes we feel like we're talking to two different customers. Our brand sells both to wholesalers who resell and also direct to consumer. How do you have how can you take your one brand story to speak to multiple audiences and multiple buyers, or maybe even multiple target customers or demographics?
And the story should really be the same. I think that, buyers need a very succinct way to understand what your brand is, what your product is, what your assortment is. They're looking at the actual SKUs, how much you can produce. There's going to be, things that you need to answer on the buyer front that, of course, you don't need to address with your consumer. But the message and the heart and the brand story should be the same. It should be something, the first thing that you share with a buyer and also the guiding principles for what you share with your audience. So I would challenge you to maybe sit and do the exercise as a team or on your own and start thinking about, how do I actually position my brand when I do tell my brand story? Is it the same? Am I trying to split it up into all these different ways because I think this is what a buyer wants to hear versus what a consumer wants to hear? And likely you'll see that the messages do have a lot of crossover, and there is a lot that should really be the same. And I think tightening up that story so that you can easily convey it in a few sentences is a really powerful thing, and will help you position your brand better. I think that like many larger stores and retailers and websites are looking for these kinds of stories. So if you can be a brand that can help provide images, can help craft a story, can do a small interview about your products, like that is content for these sites. And a lot of sites are working on building content. It used to just be media sites and magazines, but now sellers want to tell these stories also. So you can do your own PR and pitch to them and say, hey, beyond just this beautiful product, we think it would be so much more impactful if we did a quick Q&A and you included a picture of our makers and some of the details of how we actually produce our products to better connect our storytelling. I think Powered by People does a really, really good job of that. Kingship Collective does a really good job of that. Those are great websites to look at to see how other makers have been working in partnership to go beyond the product and really give a voice and a story to what they do.
Awesome. I've got another tactical question. So one of the struggles that a lot of artisan brands have, and this particular artisan brand is asking, how much do I communicate, right? So when kind of putting together a content calendar, how much do I know, or how often do I post on social media? And how often should I be sending emails? We all hear that email is still one of the most effective marketing tools we all have. When talking direct to consumer, when talking to our wholesale partners, how often should we be both posting and emailing? We don't want to be annoying, but we want to be top of mind.
I do like to establish or recommend that brands establish a cadence for posting, at least on their social channels, mostly because it just keeps you accountable and makes sure that it doesn't fall flat. I think that if you have an engaged audience, the algorithm certainly rewards the more you post. Now, people have a lot of other things going on in a business and to get products going, and it can be very, very hard, I know, to build a presence on social media. So one thing that I would suggest is batching your content, which essentially means that you would set aside a half of the day, let's say, to take product shots that you were going to use on social media and sort of work on your content strategy and a little bit about what you wanted to tell your audience over the course of maybe 2 or 3 months. And then you would bank that content and roll it out each week. Let's say you promised yourself, okay, every Friday I'm going to post an update on a new product. I'm going to tell a new story about a maker, but you've set aside the time to do it in a focused way. And you'd be surprised how much that can help you move forward. Because if you just sort of map out your cadence and set aside the time to do it all at once, it's much easier than doing it in real time. And then, sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Oh, how often should I email?
Oh, for emails. So I think that like a great way to stay top of mind for a buyer is when you have new products, because that's really what they're interested in, right? So if you have a new launch or you're doing a new category or you have a beautiful colorway that's coming up, that would be a good time to share. And then I think if you have an existing relationship with a buyer or a store or a retailer that you've worked with in the past, you can ask them, what does your calendar look like for buying? When is a good time to reach out? When are you restocking? How often do you want to communicate? I think that, people appreciate that kind of openness, because it might be different. A small store may not refresh seasonally. They may carry through stock until they have complete sell-through, where larger stores are very much focused on a buying calendar, and they are refreshing seasonally and monthly. So it's important to understand who you're talking to and sort of adjust, based on who it is. But I will say that your email should have a reason behind it that would be interesting to the person receiving it. It's always nice to just, check in, but you want it to be purposeful. So it's nice to just say, hi, so nice to connect. Thank you so much for carrying our products. I wanted to make sure you were the first to see this, and use it as a way to stay in touch, but also to promote what you're doing and what you're working on.
Fantastic. Yeah. And to add, that time blocking is so critical, as Jane mentioned earlier, right? We have small staffs and limited time. So setting aside that time to plan your social media and also your mass email campaigns using your CRM. Some tools that are recommended for that are to be able to then put everything into a schedule and schedule it to go out. Planoly, Tailwind, HubSpot, Hootsuite, CoSchedule. So there are a lot of tools you can use, as well as those email tools like Klaviyo. I really like Flowdesk, and MailChimp to put your mail in. Jane is also giving us the resource of Canva. Canva is what we use to create everything for today, all of our graphics. So there are really easy tools, many of them free or low cost, to help you with graphic design, with photos, with scheduling your content.
Absolutely. The last thing I would mention on social media is that there's a collaboration post tool now. I'm sure you've seen it, but it basically means that you've worked with a brand or a person that has a larger following, and you can post at the same time, so that it's like a cross post, and your audience sees what their audience sees, and the post is in collaboration, so the engagement is much higher. It's a really common tool with influencers and retailers, but I'm seeing brands do it as well.
That is an awesome tip, and something for the sector to really look at doing across our audiences, right? Whether you're doing it with an influencer, with one of your buyers or retail partners, or brand to brand. I love that. I'm no more questions. If you have any more questions, pop them in quickly. I'm going to ask Dana, any last thoughts or tips or advice for really, growing your sales through your story?
Yeah, I mean, I know I've touched on this a bunch, but I think finding your why. I think when you define your purpose, you act with intention, and that helps to focus your energy on the things that are going to move your brand forward. So positioning yourself in the right spaces, building your community of like-minded people and makers is going to help you get more visibility, and visibility is what's ultimately going to lead to more people discovering your brands, other opportunities, and hopefully ultimately convert to sales.
Awesome. Well, with no more questions, this has been a super presentation. We really appreciate all that you're doing for HFI and for the Handmade Summit today. And thanks so much for sharing your loads and loads of storytelling knowledge. If anyone wants to get in touch, you can find Dana in the chat. We'll see you all in just a few minutes in our last session of Inspiration Quickfire before we end for the day. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining. Take care.